Hello everybody. So we continue here on the chapter about internal migration, and this last topic about analysis of spatial association that starts on slide 65, it's related to a research project that I have been conducting related to internal migration in the US, looking at the flows for small areas in the country. And I want to just talk a little bit about this research project, but also already making an introduction to this analysis of spatial association. So in spatial association analysis, we recognize that people are not randomly distributed over space. So if we are doing analysis for the US, for example, and dividing the US by counties, if we want to do an analysis about any socioeconomic indicator, for example, or demographic indicator, we usually know that, for example, average earnings or total fertility rate or life expectancy or migration rates, they're not randomly distributed over the space over all these counties in the US. Because spatial distribution is correlated with other variables, with the characteristics of the people in those areas, the characteristics of households, and also with contextual variables that vary by state and vary by counties. And that's especially true when we have a large number of spatial observations, when we subdivide a specific territory in a series of different areas. So the assumption of stationary structural stability over space is highly unrealistic. So it's highly unrealistic that people are randomly distributed over space with similar socioeconomic and demographic characteristics. And one way to try to analyze the spatial association of a specific indicator that you have with the location of like people and households is to do this spatial analysis. So and one way to do it is to conduct an exploratory spatial data analysis. And in exploratory spatial data analysis, the predominant approach to assess a degree of spatial association usually ignores the potential structural instability. So usually in exploratory spatial data analysis, we based the analysis on a global statistics. It's pretty much a global indicator that tells us whether that specific socioeconomic or demographic variable is randomly distributed in the space or not. And this global indicator gives an overall number, one number for the whole spatial association. It's called the Moran Xi. But here I'm going to show you the local indicator of spatial association, known as LISA, which identifies local clusters and spatial outliers in the map. So we're not going to look at the map and have one single global statistics. We're going to get information about a specific indicator distributed locally in the US, and then we will be able to identify if specific areas are more clustered with higher or smaller values for a specific indicator, or if some areas have high values surrounded by low and vice versa. So LISA allows for the decomposition of these global indicators into the contribution of each one of the individual areas. It allows us to a more in-depth analysis of the association of our indicator with the space. So just to explain this local spatial autocorrelation, the LISA allows for classification of specific locations based on statistical significance of our indicator of interest on space. So it pretty much creates four groups. One group, two of these groups are the spatial clusters, areas that have high levels for a specific indicator and are surrounded by areas with high levels, areas that have low levels for that specific indicator, surrounded by areas with low levels, and then other two groups that are known as the spatial outliers, areas with high levels for a specific indicator, surrounded with areas with low level for that indicator, and areas with low level for that indicator, surrounded by areas with high level. So they are outliers because they differ from surrounding areas. And here they are clustered because they are similar to surrounding areas. So the reference to high and low is relative to the mean of the variable. So it should not be interpreted as an absolute in an absolute sense. And the estimation of this local spatial autocorrelation is done with Geoda, which is a software. It's available for free in this website. It was created by Professor Luc Anselin, and it's a software that provides an introduction to spatial data analysis, and it's really good because you can do simple maps, you can do maps estimating the local indicators of spatial association, you can also do some spatial regressions as well, so you can download it and install in your computer just going into this website. So for this specific lecture here, I will use this methodology of the local indicators of spatial association and use them to analyze the concentration of internal migrants in areas of destination in the US. So this analysis of local indicators of spatial association can be done for any indicator that you might imagine, like socioeconomic, demographic indicators, health indicators. So as I mentioned before, you could do the analysis of life expectancies in counties in the US, total fertility rate. Here, for this specific exercise, I'm going to talk about internal migration. And in order to understand specific places that have high levels of internal migration and those that have low levels of internal migration, I'm going to use this technique. And I'm going to collect data about area of residence 1 year before the 2017 American Community Survey. So the American Community Survey in 2017, we know the area of residence in that specific year, in April 1st, 2017, but people were also asked where they lived exactly 1 year before in April 1st, 2016. So for areas of destination, the current residence in 2017, the public available data has information on public use microdata areas known as PUMAs. They are the lowest level of geographic aggregation available with public available data. And with public available data, the areas of origin, the ones of previous residence, the ones about previous residence 1 year before, in 2016 in this case, the data also informs the PUMA of residence, but in some cases, for confidentiality issues, these PUMAs are grouped because they might have like really few cases, so the Census Bureau grouped them into these MIG PUMAs, which are pretty much groups of PUMAs, and then they avoid breaking the confidentiality of people who answered the American Community Survey. So in order to kind of like have similar areas of current and previous residence, I had to homogenize these areas. So our research team, we grouped the PUMAs of destination at the same geographic levels as MIG PUMAs of origin. So as I mentioned before, this public available data has information about PUMAs of current residence. So in the 2017 American Community Survey, we had 2,378 PUMAs. And in previous residence, some of the areas are similar to the PUMAs, but most of them are grouped. And then we have these MIG PUMAs that add up to 1,005 MIG PUMAs using the 2017 American Community Survey. So what we do in this specific case, we group the PUMAs in current residence at the same level as the PUMAs, as the MIG PUMAs. So we will have exactly 1,005 areas of current residence because we are grouping the PUMAs into the same level as the MIG PUMAs. So this is basically a strategy to homogenize areas of previous and current residence. And after we homogenize it, we looked at information of current and previous residents to see if people were living in the same areas. And then we could categorize people by this variable here that measures migration status. So internal migrants are those who resided in another Puma or MIG-Puma 1 year before the survey, 1 year before the 2017 American Community Survey. And the internal migrants were around 5% in that specific survey, 2017 American Community Survey. Non-migrants are those who resided in the same area in the previous year, and they were around 95% of the sample. And international migrants are those who resided in another country 1 year before the survey. But for these maps that I'm going to show you in the next slides, these people are not included in the analysis. And they were around 0.5% using the data from the 2017 American Community Survey. So pretty much we use the information about internal migrants and the proportion of internal migrants. For each one of the Pumas or MIG Pumas, I will, the proportion of them is pretty much the proportion of internal migrants considering these two as the whole population, internal migrants and non-migrants, because international migrants are not included in the analysis. So this is a distribution. This map here shows the proportion of internal migrants using the 2017 American Community Survey. So these are people who moved from 2016 to 2017. And here we have the proportion of internal migrants in each one of those 1,005 MIG Pumas, like those areas that I mentioned before. And the darker ones have more internal migrants. For example, this darkest one here has between 7.1% and 18.4% of internal migrants living in those specific areas. And when you look at this map, it's kind of difficult to understand what's going on there because it has so much variation on all these different scales here of low and high levels of internal migration. So it's hard to see exactly which areas have high values and which areas have low values. So that's where we use the local indicator of spatial association. So here the local indicator of spatial association for this specific indicator, the indicator of proportion of internal migrants in this specific year, gives us this result here. So I mentioned to you before, we have the spatial clusters, the areas with high levels of, in this case, internal migration surrounded by areas with high levels. So the indicator here is internal migration. This other cluster, areas with low levels of internal migration surrounded by low levels. In this case, here's an outlier, areas with low levels of internal migration surrounded by high, and another outlier, areas with high levels surrounded with areas with low levels of internal migration. And these numbers here in between parentheses are the number of areas, the number of MIG Pumas that were identified in each one of these subgroups here. And the areas here in light gray, almost white, are not statistically significant. So they are not clusters and they are not outliers. So we simplify the information from this map into this map. And then we see areas that have high levels of internal migration surrounded with high, the dark red ones, and dark blue ones, low level of internal migration surrounded by low level, the light blue, low level of internal migration surrounded by high level, so low level surrounded by high, and then the pink areas have high levels of internal migration surrounded by areas with high level of internal migration surrounded with areas with low level of internal migration, right? So that's what this map shows. But then it's interesting to get this map here and break it down by characteristics of the population. So from this map here, we can break it down into these four maps. Here we have internal migrants as those who changed residence between 2016 and 2017, as I mentioned before. These two maps here are for non-migrants. These ones here are for internal migrants. And here we have US-born non-migrants, foreign-born non-migrants, US-born internal, and foreign-born internal migrants. So US-born non-migrants, they are usually located in Midwest and also in the southern states here. And US-born internal migrants, they're usually going into Oregon and Idaho, and also to Utah and Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and some other areas in the country. Foreign-born non-migrants, people who did not move between 2016 and 2017, but were born in another country, they have really low chances of being in these specific areas here. So say they did not move between 16 and 17, but they were born in another country. So they moved into the US before 2016, and in between these 2 years here, they did not move. So they tend to don't move to these areas here. They have really few chances to be located in these areas here, highlighted with like the dark blue. So the chances of finding foreign-born non-migrants in these areas is really low. And we see higher proportions of foreign-born non-migrants exactly in California, in Arizona, in Texas, and also New Mexico and Florida, and also in New York State, for example, in New Jersey as well. But what is interesting to see is that this foreign-born population that did not move between 16 and 17, they are really concentrated in areas that are usually close to the southern border, and also Florida that receives a lot of migrants, and New York as well. And the foreign-born internal migrants, so these people were not born in the US, and between 16 and 17, they did move within the US. So they are concentrated more in California and also Texas and New Mexico, and in all these areas here, more in Midwest and a little bit in the South too, you see really few concentration of them. And also you see some clusters of high levels of this specific group of people in Florida and in New York and New Jersey as well. So, and then we can break a little more. In these next maps here, we are just talking about internal migrants. We took out all known internal migrants. We have here all maps are for internal migrants, and we break them by these specific race ethnicity groups. So we have non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic African Americans, Hispanics, and non-Hispanic Native Americans. So non-Hispanic whites, the ones who are internal migrants, the ones who moved between 2016 and 17, the highest chance of them moving to or exactly to Oregon and also Washington State, Idaho, Montana, Utah, Arizona, and really few chances to move to California, New Mexico, and Texas, for example, and also Louisiana. For non-Hispanic African American, this is really interesting. See, all these areas, all these states in the west of the country, and also in the north and northeast of the country, have really low chances of receive non-Hispanic African migrants who are moving internally in the country. And most of them are moving into the southern states here. So Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and also North Carolina. And so a little bit less in South Carolina here, but it's still some areas. But so you see this map for non-Hispanic African Americans is really interesting, not only to show where they have higher chances to move, but a great portion of areas in the country they are not moving to. They have really lower chances to internally migrate to those places. For Hispanics, in this case, for internal migrants, they usually migrate exactly to states closer to the southern border, so California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And these Hispanics, not necessarily they are foreign-born. In these specific maps here, we are taking all together, foreign-born and US-born. But what's interesting to see is that Hispanics, the ones who migrated internally in the US from 2016 and 17, they have higher chances to move to these areas, as I mentioned before, and lower chances to move more to these southern areas here and also to the Midwest. And the non-Hispanic Native Americans, also an interesting pattern. They have higher chances to internally migrate in the country to North Dakota, South Dakota, and also to Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Oklahoma. And those states usually have more reservations for Native Americans. So it's interesting to see that they're tending to move exactly to those states and lower chances to move to these other dark blue areas. So we are still in the process of analyzing these internal migration flows in the US using these 1,005 MIG Pumas, using data from the American Community Survey. And we are analyzing the American Community Survey from 2005 to 2018. The 2018 American Community Survey just became available after we finished those maps here, and we're going to update it. But it's just to show that these analysis of flows in different sub-areas of the country, it's easier to understand them when we use the LISA, the Local Indicators of Spatial Association. And we can break these internal migration proportions, these rates, by a series of different characteristics of the population. We can also do by education, we can also do by age, we can also do by sex, and that's within the purpose of our research project as well. And this final slide here, I show the references that I used throughout the lecture, throughout all these videos related to internal migration. And these two papers here by Molloy and co-authors about internal migration in the US, it's really important, it's really good to read these studies, and also this more recent paper about job change and the decline in long distance migration in the US, because it gives us an idea of more recent patterns of internal migration in the US. And that's a great reference to learn more about internal migration in the United States. So that's what I have to talk about this chapter related to internal migration. Thank you very much.